The rain had fallen all day without pause, soaking the sleepy streets of Willow Creek until the asphalt shimmered like black glass under the streetlights. In that hour just after dusk, when the town seemed to draw its breath and settle into quiet, 15-year-old Lucy Hart made her way home from the late shift at the local diner. She moved quickly, clutching her worn backpack against the drizzle. At the diner, the cook, old Henry, had slipped her an extra slice of pie wrapped in foil, a kindness that warmed her heart even as her shoes soaked through. Her grandmother, Mabel, would pretend not to want it, but they both knew she'd take a bite when Lucy wasn't looking. It was their small ritual, a comfort that tethered Lucy to a world that often felt too fragile. But on this night, fate had plans that no one could predict. As Lucy turned onto the winding road that led to the cluster of houses at the town's edge, the hush of rain was split by a roar of an engine. Too fast, too loud for the wet road. Her breath caught. Headlights swung wildly through the trees, blinding her for an instant. Then came a sickening screech of tires, the violent lurch of metal twisting against itself, and finally, an explosion that swallowed the night in flames. For a heartbeat, Lucy stood frozen. Her pulse thudded in her ears, and the world seemed to slow. Then, driven by a force deeper than fear, she bolted toward the blaze. The wreck lay half off the road, flames licking across the crumpled hood. The acrid stench of gasoline burned her throat. Through the cracked windshield, she glimpsed a figure, slumped, unmoving, a trickle of blood running down his temple. "Hang on," she gasped, though he couldn't hear. Smoke clawed at her lungs as she yanked on the driver's door. It wouldn't budge. Sparks danced across the pavement, and heat prickled her skin. Panic clawed at her mind, but she shoved it aside. Lucy scrambled around the other side, fingers numb with cold and fear. This door groaned open under her desperate pull. Inside, the man's head lolled, eyes fluttering open at her touch. In that split second, their gazes met, his, glazed with pain and confusion, hers, burning with a determination she didn't know she possessed. "It's okay," she choked out, though it was anything but. "I've got you." Smoke curled around them, and somewhere behind her, sirens began to wail. Lucy hooked her arms under his, bracing herself. With a grunt of effort, she dragged him from the seat. The man gasped, his breath ragged, as they spilled onto the rain-slick asphalt. Lucy's chest burned, and tears blurred her sight, but relief crashed over her when she felt the weight of his body outside the burning shell of the car. She hauled him a few feet away, stumbling, until the heat was no longer searing. He coughed violently, pain twisting his features, but his eyes found hers again. "Who are you?" he rasped. "I'm Lucy," she whispered, voice shaking. "Just, hold on." Flames surged behind them, a brutal reminder of what could have happened if she'd arrived seconds later. And in those few moments, soaked to the bone and trembling, Lucy didn't yet know that this man was Jack Miller, a name she'd heard only in passing, attached to stories of wealth and boardrooms she couldn't imagine. Nor could she guess that his face, still streaked with blood and soot, would soon feel hauntingly familiar. The wail of sirens grew louder, and the red and blue lights split the darkness. Paramedics rushed forward, voices sharp and urgent, lifting Jack onto a stretcher. Lucy stepped back, her hands smudged with soot, heart thudding so hard it hurt. A paramedic glanced at her, concern flickering across her features. "You okay?" I think so," Lucy murmured, though her head felt light. The paramedic gently guided her toward the back of an ambulance, checking her pulse, shining a light into her eyes. But Lucy's gaze stayed locked on the man being carried away, the man whose life she had somehow saved. Rain continued to fall, softening the acrid scent of burnt rubber. The fire crew doused the last stubborn flames, steam hissing into the night air. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself, her damp clothes clinging to chilled skin, and felt a strange pull in her chest, something beyond fear or relief. It was as though an invisible thread now connected her to the man in the stretcher, binding them in ways she couldn't yet understand. They took Jack away, sirens fading into the distance. Lucy stood under the dripping branches, her breath coming in shaky bursts. A question burned at the back of her mind, stubborn and insistent: why had his face felt so strangely familiar? By the time she walked home, her legs were heavy as lead. Mabel was waiting by the door, her thin nightgown fluttering in the draught. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lucy, wet, pale, and haunted. "What happened, love?" Mabel whispered, her voice edged with fear. Lucy's lips parted, but words failed her. All she could do was hold out her trembling, soot-stained hands. Mabel gathered her close, warmth and worry radiating from her frail frame. Come in, come in. Tell me slowly." Inside, wrapped in a worn blanket, Lucy recounted every detail: the screech of tires, the explosion, the man's weight heavy against her shoulder. Mabel listened in silence, her gaze shadowed by something deeper than shock. And when Lucy mentioned the photo they found in Jack's wallet, a faded picture of a younger Jack beside a smiling woman Lucy knew from old albums, Mabel's breath caught. That's your mother," Mabel murmured, her words almost swallowed by the crackle of the old stove. "Rebecca." The room felt smaller suddenly, air heavy with memories and secrets unspoken. Lucy's chest tightened. "Why would he have her picture?" she whispered. Mabel didn't answer at first. Her gaze drifted to the rain streaking down the window, and for a moment, Lucy saw something raw in her eyes: fear, regret, and sorrow intertwined. Outside, the rain eased to a gentle drizzle, but inside the little house, a storm had only just begun. That night, Lucy lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. Her heart pounded with questions too heavy for her years. Somewhere in the city, the man whose life she had saved, Jack Miller, lay in a hospital bed, carrying a photograph of her mother close to his heart. And though she couldn't yet see the shape of what was coming, Lucy knew her life had crossed into something new, a story that had waited 15 years to begin. Morning brought little warmth to Willow Creek. The rain had left the streets slick and shining, as though trying to wash away the scorch marks from the night before. But for Lucy Hart, no dawn could clear the shadows lingering in her thoughts. She rose early, though she'd barely slept. The memory of the burning wreck, the stranger's soot-streaked face, and above all, the photograph, a picture of her mother, Rebecca, smiling beside him, clung to her mind like the scent of smoke on her clothes. Mabel moved slowly through the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea into mismatched cups. Lucy watched her grandmother closely, noticing the weariness that seemed deeper than age. Mabel had always been her anchor, but now even Mabel seemed unsettled, glancing at Lucy as if weighing words she couldn't yet speak. "Gran," Lucy began, her voice softer than a whisper, "why would that man have a photo of Mum?" Mabel stirred her tea for a long moment before setting the spoon aside. "Rebecca and Jack Miller. They were close once," she said at last. "Very close. Before you were born." The words fell between them, heavy as rain. Lucy's breath caught. "You mean, she knew him?" "They were sweethearts," Mabel admitted, her gaze far away. "But something happened. They parted ways. And your mother, she never told him about you." Lucy's chest tightened, as though the walls had inched closer. "Does that mean he could be my father?" Mabel's silence was answer enough. Outside, the wind rattled the loose pane in the window, but Lucy barely heard. Her thoughts churned, each revelation opening a door to questions she hadn't dared to ask. All these years, she had imagined her father as a ghost, a silhouette her mother never spoke of. Now he had a name, a face, a life that had nearly ended before her eyes. Later that day, Lucy gathered her courage and slipped out to visit the hospital. Willow Creek General wasn't large, its corridors smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. The receptionist eyed Lucy's worn coat but didn't stop her. Guided by instinct more than direction, Lucy found the room where Jack Miller lay recovering. She stood by the doorway, heart hammering so loudly she feared he might hear. Through the glass, she saw him awake, propped against pillows, a bandage at his temple. Despite the bruises and fatigue that dulled his features, there was a quiet strength in his posture, and a sadness that seemed older than the scars he'd just earned. For a long moment, she simply watched him. A man who might be nothing to her, or everything. Then Jack's eyes lifted, catching hers. His gaze sharpened, recognition flickering. "Lucy," he rasped, his voice raw but steady. She stepped inside, the words she'd practiced dissolving on her tongue. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." Jack studied her, his expression softening. "Thanks to you, I am. The doctors said, if you hadn't pulled me out, I wouldn't be here." Lucy shifted her weight, cheeks flushed. "I couldn't just leave you." Silence hung between them, delicate yet full of things unsaid. Jack reached toward the bedside table, picking up the photo that had survived the crash, the image of him and Rebecca. He held it out to her, his hand unsteady. "You know her," he said quietly. Lucy's voice caught. "She was my mom." The words landed between them like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through both of them. Jack's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he swallowed hard, as if steadying himself on fragile ground. "I always wondered, what happened to her," he whispered, pain shadowing his eyes. "And now, you're here." Lucy looked down, twisting her hands together. "She died. Years ago. I've been living with Gran, with Mabel." A flicker of recognition crossed Jack's features at Mabel's name. Then something shifted in his gaze, a tenderness Lucy didn't expect, mingled with the weight of regret. "I didn't know," he murmured, his voice cracking. "She never told me about you." Lucy hesitated, her heart pounding. She never spoke of you either." "Not really. Only once, and even then, it hurt her to talk about the past." Jack nodded, his eyes glistening. "We had our share of mistakes," he admitted, staring at the photograph as though trying to bridge the years. "I thought of her often. I never knew she had a daughter. My daughter." The words hung in the air, as delicate and dangerous as a bird's first flight. Lucy's breath caught. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way nothing else could. Part of her wanted to embrace it, to ask him every question she'd kept buried, another part feared what it would mean if it were true. Jack drew a shaky breath. "Lucy, would you let me get to know you? To know what I missed?" She hesitated, thinking of Mabel at home, the shadows under her grandmother's eyes. The years of stories left untold. And yet, looking into Jack's tired, earnest face, she felt something stir, not trust yet, but a fragile hope. I think I'd like that," she whispered. A small, grateful smile curved Jack's lips, though it trembled at the edges. "Thank you," he said, voice heavy with relief and sorrow all at once. Before she left, he asked softly, "Lucy, would you bring Mabel to see me? I'd like to speak with her." Lucy nodded, though her mind buzzed with questions. Outside his room, she paused in the quiet hallway, the scent of disinfectant sharp in the air. For the first time, the silhouette of her father wasn't just a shadow in her imagination, he had become real, breathing, and broken, yet still standing. As she stepped into the cold afternoon, drizzle misting her face, Lucy felt the weight of the past pressing close. Yet woven into that weight was a thread of something unexpected, the first, fragile hint of belonging. What neither of them could yet know was how deeply the past had been twisted by unseen hands, and how the truth, once uncovered, would change them all forever. The autumn wind carried a sharper bite the next day as Lucy made her way back home, her mind still reeling from the hospital visit. Mabel was waiting by the window, as though she hadn't moved since Lucy left. At the sight of her granddaughter, she exhaled a breath she must have been holding for hours. "You saw him?" Mabel asked, her voice tight. Lucy nodded, slipping out of her coat. "He knows, Gran. About me. About Mum. He wants to see you." For a moment, Mabel's expression softened, grief and nostalgia pooling in her eyes. Then her shoulders stiffened, and she turned away, busying herself at the stove. "There are things he needs to know," she murmured. "And there are things you need to hear, too." Lucy felt her heart tighten, sensing truths waiting in the silence between them. That evening, as steam curled from mugs of tea and rain tapped gently against the roof, Mabel began to speak. "Your mother loved Jack Miller," she began, her voice trembling around the words. "They met at university, young and sure the world would bend to their love. But life wasn't kind. And not everyone around them wished them well." Lucy leaned forward, gripping her mug. "Who, Gran?" Mabel's gaze grew distant. "Your mother had a sister. Melissa." Lucy frowned. "Aunt Melissa?" Mabel nodded slowly. From the start, Melissa envied Rebecca. Jack was kind, driven, and wealthy even back then. And Melissa, well, she saw opportunity where your mother saw love. Lucy's chest tightened. "What did she do?" "She interfered," Mabel whispered. "Letters that never reached Jack. Calls Rebecca swore she made, but Jack never returned. Melissa told Rebecca Jack had moved on. And to Jack, she hinted Rebecca had lost interest, found someone else." Lucy's stomach knotted, horror curling in her gut. Why would she do that? "For money," Mabel said, voice hardening. "And for spite. Your mother was gentle, but Melissa always wanted what wasn't hers. When Rebecca found out she was pregnant, she tried to reach Jack again. But Melissa made sure he never heard." Lucy could barely breathe. "So he didn't know. All this time, he didn't know about me." Mabel shook her head. "No, love. And your mother, she carried the heartbreak until the end." Tears burned at Lucy's eyes. She pictured her mother, young and hopeful, betrayed by the very sister who should have stood by her. And Jack, living his life unaware that a piece of his heart had been lost before he even knew it existed. "And Melissa," Lucy whispered, "what happened to her?" Mabel's lips tightened. "After your mother passed, she offered to take you in. Claimed she'd give you a better life. But I knew better than to trust her, and your mother's last wish was that you stay with me." Lucy shivered, the weight of old secrets settling on her shoulders. "Does Jack know all this?" "He should," Mabel said. "And perhaps it's time he hears it from me." The next day, Lucy walked beside Mabel through the hospital corridors, each step slow and deliberate. Jack's room was brighter than before, morning sun slanting across the blankets. When he saw Mabel, something raw and unspoken crossed his face, a recognition of shared loss. "Mabel," he breathed, voice cracking. She nodded, folding her hands before her. "Jack," she replied quietly. For a moment, words failed them. Then Mabel's gaze turned solemn. "There's something you must hear." She told him everything, the letters that vanished, the calls that were never returned, Melissa's subtle sabotage. Jack's hands curled into fists as the truth unraveled, his knuckles white against the sheets. "All this time," he rasped. "I thought she'd left me. That she'd stopped caring." "No," Mabel said gently. "She carried you in her heart until the day she died. And she left behind your daughter." Tears welled in Jack's eyes. Lucy, standing beside Mabel, felt her own tears fall silently. The weight of years lost pressed on them all, heavy with what might have been. "I failed her," Jack whispered. "And I failed Lucy, without knowing." Mabel shook her head. "You failed no one, Jack. The fault lies with Melissa, and with the silence we all allowed." That afternoon, Jack's resolve hardened. "Lucy," he said, voice steadier, "I want to bring this into the light. To know exactly what your aunt did, and why." Lucy nodded, though dread prickled in her chest. "She'll deny it," she warned. "Then we'll find the truth," Jack vowed. Together. They started gently, tracing old letters Rebecca had hidden in the lining of a keepsake box. Lucy had kept it for years, the worn velvet soft under her fingers. Carefully, she and Jack read the faded words. Letters full of hope, of love, of longing, never answered. One letter, dated just before Lucy's birth, spoke of Rebecca's fear that Jack would never know his child. Another mentioned Melissa by name, a single line edged in despair, if only Melissa would stop interfering. I could tell him everything. Jack's hands shook as he read. His voice, when it came, was thick with emotion. She tried, he whispered. She tried so hard to reach me. In the weeks that followed, Jack hired a lawyer, determined to bring Melissa's actions to light. The process unearthed more than they'd dared hope, medical records showing Melissa had denied payment for a specialist when Rebecca's pregnancy became complicated, and witness statements from old neighbors who remembered Melissa's visits marked by shouting matches and tears. When Melissa was confronted, her mask slipped. The veneer of concern cracked, revealing resentment that had festered for years. She always had everything, she hissed. And then she had you, too. Jack listened, silent and unflinching, as Melissa spat out the bitterness that had twisted her heart. Lucy stood beside him, her own heart aching at how jealousy had stolen so much from them all. Yet in those dark truths, something unexpected blossomed, a fragile bond between Jack and Lucy. Nights spent over letters and tea blurred the years they'd lost, replacing absence with shared discovery. Jack listened to Lucy's stories of growing up, of Mabel's quiet strength, and Lucy learned of the young man her mother had loved, driven, stubborn, and quietly kind. The past had stolen time from them, but the present offered a chance to reclaim what mattered most, family. One evening, as autumn leaves danced across the lawn, Jack turned to Lucy, his voice low. I can't undo what happened, he said, but I can promise you this, from now on, you won't face anything alone. Lucy's throat tightened, words tangled in emotion too deep to name. Instead, she simply leaned into him, and for the first time, felt what she'd only dreamed of, a father's embrace. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the last remnants of secrets left too long unspoken. And though the road ahead would still hold grief and shadows, Lucy and Jack would face it together, no longer strangers, but family found at last. The days that followed felt as though they existed in two worlds at once. In one, Lucy and Jack finally dared to dream of family, in the other, the shadow of Melissa darkened every corner of hope. It didn't take long before that shadow stepped fully into their lives. One crisp morning, a knock echoed through Mabel's modest living room. Lucy opened the door to see a woman she had once called Aunt Melissa standing on the porch, eyes sharp as winter ice. I see you've been busy, Melissa said coolly, her gaze flickering past Lucy to where Jack now stood. Jack stepped forward, shoulders squared. We need to talk, Melissa. Her lip curled. Oh, I know. You think you can drag my name through the mud and keep her, she said, nodding toward Lucy. But she's not yours to take. Lucy's chest tightened. The venom in Melissa's voice made her stomach twist. I'm not yours to keep either, Lucy managed to say, voice trembling. Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. We'll see what the court has to say about that. What followed felt like a waking nightmare. Papers arrived at Mabel's door, a summons. Melissa had filed for custody of Lucy, claiming Mabel was too old and unwell to care for her, and that Jack was a stranger with no established parental rights. Lucy watched Mabel's face pale as she read the words. She'll drag us through this, Mabel whispered, her hands shaking. After everything. Jack gently took the papers from Mabel. She won't win, he promised. Not this time. Yet even as he spoke, Lucy saw the doubt flicker behind his eyes. The truth was, Melissa had money of her own, connections, and years of false stories she could spin into something dangerous. The first hearing was set on a rainy Thursday. Lucy sat between Jack and Mabel in the crowded courtroom, her heart thudding so loudly it drowned out the shuffle of papers and murmured voices. Melissa's lawyer painted a picture of Jack as an absent, irresponsible man. Too consumed by his wealth and business to care for a teenage daughter he'd never known. Worse, he twisted truths about Mabel's health into a case of neglect. Lucy felt anger rise like a flame in her chest. She wanted to stand up, to shout that Melissa was lying, but the courtroom was a place of rules and silence. Then it was Jack's turn. He stood, every line of his face carved by grief, love, and quiet resolve. "I never knew about my daughter," he said, voice low but steady. "If I had, I would have moved heaven and earth to find her. I won't fail her again." Outside the courthouse, rain fell in steady sheets. Jack turned to Lucy, brushing wet hair from her face. "We'll keep fighting," he said. Lucy nodded, though fear coiled tight in her chest. "What if she wins, Dad?" The word slipped out before she could catch it. Jack's eyes softened, surprise and quiet joy breaking through the worry. "Then we fight harder," he whispered. "Together." The days blurred into weeks of preparation. Jack's lawyer gathered evidence, the hidden letters Rebecca had written, medical records showing Melissa's interference, and neighbors willing to testify to the fights they'd overheard between the sisters. At night, Lucy lay awake listening to Mabel's breathing in the next room, each raspy exhale a reminder that time wasn't on their side. Mabel's illness was worsening. Some mornings, she struggled even to sit up. One evening, as Jack sat beside Lucy on the worn sofa, she found her voice. "If something happens to Gran," she asked softly, "will I still stay with you?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "I won't let you go, Lucy. Not ever again." The final hearing arrived like a distant storm finally breaking overhead. Lucy stood outside the courtroom, clutching a photo of her mother, Rebecca, smiling and bright-eyed, holding baby Lucy in her arms. Inside, Melissa's lawyer leaned heavily on Mabel's illness, arguing Lucy needed stability only Melissa could provide. But Jack's lawyer countered with truth, the letters, the medical neglect, and witnesses describing Melissa's cruelty. Then, unexpectedly, Mabel asked to speak. She rose slowly, her breath ragged, but her gaze fierce. Rebecca's last wish was clear, she told the court, voice stronger than Lucy had heard in weeks. That Lucy never fall into her sister's hands. Jack didn't abandon them, he was kept from them. For a moment, the courtroom fell utterly silent, the weight of those words pressing on everyone present. At last, the judge's decision was read. Lucy's breath caught, her fingers twisting around the photo until her knuckles turned white. Custody awarded to Jack Miller. Melissa's petition denied. Lucy's vision blurred with tears. Jack pulled her close, his hand warm against her trembling back. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." Outside the courthouse, Melissa disappeared into the rain, her expression brittle and cold. Lucy felt a pang of sadness despite everything, so much of this pain had grown from envy and loneliness. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to settle. Jack moved them into a warm, sunlit home on the edge of town. Mabel's illness continued to steal her strength, but Jack's presence seemed to ease her heart. Some nights, Lucy would find them sitting together, sharing quiet conversation, the years of silence finally broken. One evening, Lucy and Jack stood beside Mabel's bed as twilight painted the walls in soft gold. Mabel's voice was thin but calm. "You've given her back the father she deserved," she told Jack. "And you've given me peace." Lucy pressed her hand gently over Mabel's, tears slipping free. "I love you, Gran," she whispered. "And I love you, my brave girl," Mabel murmured. Not long after, Mabel slipped away, her final breath gentle as falling snow. Lucy's grief came in waves, but this time she wasn't alone. Jack stood with her at the graveside, his arms steady around her shoulders. Together, they mourned, and together they remembered. On the day Mabel was laid to rest, Jack and Lucy visited the quiet spot under the old oak tree where they'd buried her ashes. Jack held a small plaque in his hand, its engraving simple, in loving memory of Mabel, the heart that kept us together. Lucy traced the words, her tears falling freely. She kept us safe, she whispered. And she brought us home, Jack added softly. That night, Lucy sat beside Jack on the porch, the stars bright overhead. Do you think Mum would be proud? She asked. I know she would, Jack replied. She loved you fiercely, Lucy. And now it's my turn to do the same. For the first time in so many years, Lucy felt something she could finally name, belonging. Despite the scars left by betrayal and grief, they had found what Melissa had tried to steal. Not just family, but love built on truth. In the darkness, Jack reached for Lucy's hand. And though the past could not be changed, the future lay open before them, waiting to be written together. Morning light spilled across the new house Jack had chosen for them, a place of warm brick and gentle gardens, where silence felt comforting rather than heavy. Lucy wandered from room to room, still half believing it was real, the sunlit kitchen where Mabel would have sat with her tea, the quiet study Jack had set aside for Lucy's schoolwork, the living room where laughter was finally starting to replace grief. Yet it was outside, in the garden under the budding branches of a young maple, that Lucy felt closest to both her mother and grandmother. There, she and Jack had planted a small memorial stone beside Mabel's plaque, this one bearing just 2 words, for Rebecca. One morning, Jack found Lucy sitting cross-legged by the tree, tracing the letters with her fingertip. She never got to see this, Lucy murmured. Jack crouched beside her. No, he agreed softly. But she's why it exists. Everything we're doing now, it's because of her love. Lucy looked up. You mean the foundation? Yes, Jack said. It's time to do something that matters, for her, for Mabel, and for you. The idea had begun in quiet conversations between them, late at night after grief had softened its hold, a foundation that would help children who had been separated from their families, children like Lucy once was. Jack, once consumed by boardrooms and bottom lines, now spoke of purpose and second chances. They named it the Carter Miller Foundation, a tribute to Lucy's mother's maiden name and Jack's own. It felt right, as if 2 halves of a story had finally come together. The day they registered the charity, Jack handed Lucy a pen. You should be the one to sign first, he said. Her hand trembled as she wrote Lucy Carter Miller, feeling the weight of both names settle into her bones. It was as though she was claiming every part of her story, her mother's courage, Jack's new devotion, and even the scars left by Melissa's betrayal. Launching the foundation was harder than either of them had imagined. Jack's wealth opened doors, but it couldn't erase suspicion. Some whispered it was a publicity stunt, others doubted a teenage girl could have a real role beyond her name on the letterhead. Yet Lucy surprised even herself. The first time she spoke at a community gathering, her voice caught, but then settled into something stronger. I know what it's like to feel forgotten, she told the small crowd. I know what it's like to believe you don't matter. And I know what it means when someone finally shows you that you do. People listened. Donations trickled in, then began to flow steadily. Jack stepped back at times, letting Lucy lead, watching with quiet pride as she blossomed into something more than either of them had dared hope. As weeks turned to months, the foundation's offices took shape inside an old library Jack restored downtown. Light streamed through arched windows onto worn tables now covered in laptops, binders, and hopeful plans. Volunteers came, teachers, social workers, neighbors who'd once offered Mabel quiet support. Each brought stories of children who had slipped through cracks, of families shattered by silence and secrets. One afternoon, Lucy returned from a school meeting to find Jack in the new office's main room, staring at a wall where they had pinned photos of children helped so far. His eyes were distant, troubled. What is it? She asked. I keep thinking about the years I lost, he admitted. Years I could have been there for you. Lucy stepped closer. But you're here now. And we're helping other kids so they don't have to lose those years. Jack nodded slowly. You're right, he murmured. We can't change the past. But we can build something that lasts. There were setbacks. Permits delayed by red tape. Donors who promised support, then vanished. Late nights where Jack's old instincts re-emerged, frustration, the urge to control, to fix everything himself. But then there were victories, a family reunited after months of struggle, a grant awarded that meant the foundation could fund medical care for children like Evan, the triplets still recovering from a heart condition left untreated too long. Lucy would never forget the first time they received a letter from a girl named Zoe, 12 years old, who wrote simply, "Thank you for finding my dad." Reading those words, Lucy pressed the paper to her chest, tears slipping down her cheek. Outside the office, the world moved on. Seasons changed, leaves reddened, then fell. Birthdays came. Lucy's 16th, celebrated quietly with a cake Jack baked himself, its lopsided shape making them both laugh until they couldn't breathe. Jack gave her a small locket, inside which he'd placed photos of Rebecca and Mabel. "So you'll always have them with you," he said. "I already do," Lucy whispered, though she wore the locket every day afterward. Slowly, people around town stopped seeing Jack and Lucy as a curiosity, the millionaire and the girl he discovered was his daughter, and started seeing them as family. Jack began showing up at Lucy's school recitals, his applause the loudest in the hall. On weekends, they cooked together, burning pancakes more often than not. Through it all, Lucy noticed changes in Jack too. The lines of worry on his face softened, the quick temper that once flared in boardrooms gave way to gentler patience. He still worked hard, but now it was for something that reached beyond himself. One evening, they walked through the nearly finished Children's Center, a new wing of the foundation designed to be a safe space for kids in crisis. Fresh paint still carried the scent of hope, and Lucy traced her fingers over the bright murals volunteers had painted. "It's beautiful," she said. Jack looked at her, his voice quiet. "So are you." They stood in silence, taking in what they had built together. A place born not from wealth alone, but from loss, love, and the stubborn decision to turn pain into something that could help others. Later that night, back at home, Lucy sat by the memorial tree, locket in hand. She whispered softly, words meant for her mother and Mabel, "We're doing it. We're really doing it." Behind her, Jack stepped into the garden. "They'd be proud," he said. Lucy looked up, and for the first time, she believed it completely. Together, they had taken the ashes of heartbreak and built something alive. Something that could heal wounds not just their own, but those of countless others. And though grief would never fully leave them, love had found its place beside it, strong enough to carry them forward into the future they were building, together. For months, it felt as though life had finally settled into something close to peace. Lucy adjusted to her new school, Jack balanced his business with foundation work, and the memory of betrayal faded into the background, until the day a letter arrived that shook their fragile calm. It was late afternoon when Jack found the envelope slipped under the office door. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and painfully familiar. He read it once, then again, the words carving old wounds deeper. "Jack. You think you've won, but you've forgotten what I know. We're not finished. Richard." Jack's breath caught. Richard, his former business partner, the man who tried to ruin him before. A man who had vanished after Melissa's trial but clearly hadn't given up. Jack folded the letter, his jaw tight, as footsteps approached. Lucy, returning from school, caught the tension in his face instantly. "What is it?" she asked. Jack hesitated. "Just, something from the past," he murmured. Lucy stepped closer. "Dad," she said softly, using the word she had only recently grown comfortable with. "We don't keep secrets. Not anymore." With a sigh, Jack handed her the letter. Lucy read it silently, her eyes darkening. "What does he want?" she whispered. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." Richard had always been more than a business partner. Once, he had been Jack's closest friend. They built companies side by side, celebrated victories, mourned losses. But greed had twisted Richard, and after Jack discovered evidence of fraud, Richard blamed him for the empire's collapse. When Jack refused to protect him, Richard vowed revenge. It was Richard, Jack suspected, who had once whispered lies in Melissa's ear, fueling the bitterness that led to Sarah's isolation. Now, it seemed, Richard had returned to collect on old grudges. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Lucy went through the motions at school, but the old fear crept back in, that the safety they'd built could crumble again. At the foundation office, Jack worked late, staring at the letter until words blurred. One night, Lucy stood at his door. "Dad," she said gently, "talk to me." Jack looked up, weariness etched into his features. "I thought I'd buried the past," he confessed. "But it keeps coming back." Lucy crossed the room and placed her hand over his. "Maybe it's not about burying it," she said softly. "Maybe it's about facing it, and proving it can't hurt us anymore." They decided to act, not wait. Jack hired investigators, digging for any sign of Richard's movements. Lucy suggested they review old records, searching for weaknesses Richard might exploit. In the evenings, father and daughter pored over files together, discovering the extent of Richard's manipulations, forged contracts, hidden accounts, and, worst of all, connections to Melissa that went deeper than they'd known. Lucy's heart ached as she realized how close Richard had been to tearing their family apart before they'd even found each other. One night, Jack leaned back, exhaustion clouding his eyes. "If Richard comes after me," he said quietly, "promise me you won't blame yourself. None of this is your fault." But Lucy shook her head. "And if he comes after you," she replied, "promise me you won't fight alone." The next blow came quietly, through a whispered rumor in the business press. Richard claimed Jack had used foundation funds for personal gain. It was a lie, but in the world Jack had left behind, lies often traveled faster than truth. Reporters camped outside the foundation office. Donors grew nervous, 2 large pledges were suddenly under review. Volunteers exchanged anxious looks. In the middle of it, Lucy stood before the staff, voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "This foundation isn't built on lies," she told them. "We're going to prove it." Jack watched her, pride shining through his worry. "Your mother would have loved your courage," he whispered afterward. "And Mabel would have told me to hold my chin up," Lucy said, managing a small smile. Together, they gathered proof, audit reports, bank statements, testimonies from accountants and volunteers. It was painstaking work, but each document became a brick in the wall they built against Richard's accusations. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the story shifted. A leaked recording surfaced, Richard, drunk and angry, boasting about how he'd ruined Jack and that little charity of his. The media pivoted. Donors returned. The foundation's reputation, once teetering, steadied. In the quiet aftermath, Lucy asked, "Why do people like him do this? Why keep hurting others, even when it costs them everything?" Jack thought for a long moment. "Because some people would rather destroy what they envy than build something of their own," he said gently. Richard was finally located in another state, facing charges unrelated to Jack. He was arrested quietly, and though neither Jack nor Lucy saw him again, the shadow he'd cast began to fade. That night, under the maple tree in the garden, Jack and Lucy stood together. The tree had grown taller, its branches reaching outward like hope itself. "We're still standing," Lucy whispered. Jack nodded. "And we're stronger for it." In the weeks that followed, the foundation resumed its work. New programs were launched, scholarships for children aging out of foster care, medical grants for kids like Evan. Lucy found joy in small victories. A child's first smile in weeks, a letter of thanks from a family reunited. Yet the experience left its mark. Jack became more watchful, careful to protect what they'd built. Lucy, too, understood more deeply the weight of carrying other people's trust. But rather than hardening them, the trial forged something unbreakable, a shared resolve to keep building, no matter who tried to tear them down. One quiet evening, Lucy sat on the porch, watching the stars. Jack joined. "Are you still afraid?" she asked. "Sometimes," Jack admitted. "But fear doesn't win unless we let it stop us." Lucy looked at him, realizing how far they had both come, from strangers bound by blood to a family bound by love, trust, and shared scars. "We won't let it," she said firmly. "No," Jack agreed. "We won't." And so, together, they moved forward, past old betrayals, past fear, and into a future still uncertain, but theirs to shape. Whatever else came, they had each other. And in that simple truth, they found the strength to keep going. The past might return, but it could no longer define them. They had chosen, again and again, to be more than what had hurt them. And in that choice, they found hope, and the promise of tomorrow. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Carter Miller Foundation office, casting long golden lines across the floor. Lucy paused in the doorway, letting the light wash over her face. It felt different now, this place. No longer just a dream built on hope and sorrow, but something alive, breathing, growing. A year had passed since Richard's last threat had been silenced. A year of rebuilding trust, mending wounds, and daring to look forward rather than back. Outside, the city moved with its usual quiet urgency, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place behind the foundation's walls, the rebirth of a family once fractured, now united. It began on a brisk spring morning, with a single idea scribbled in Lucy's notebook: create something lasting. A center for children who'd lost their parents, not just to death but to absence, silence, or circumstance. A place that offered more than food or shelter, a promise that they weren't alone. Jack read her notes at the kitchen table, his eyes lingering on her neat handwriting. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It could work," Lucy replied, hope rising in her voice. "It will work," Jack corrected gently. "Because we'll build it together." Construction started on the new center that summer. Jack often arrived early, watching as walls rose from bare earth, each brick a testament to resilience. Lucy visited after school, slipping on a hard hat 2 sizes too big, her laughter echoing across the site. Some evenings they stayed late, sitting on unfinished steps, looking out at the skyline. "It still scares me sometimes," Lucy confessed. "That it could all disappear." Jack looked at her, his expression soft. "It could," he admitted. "But if it does, we'll build it again. Because what we have now, this family, is what can't be taken." And for the first time, Lucy truly believed him. In those months, Jack discovered something unexpected: fatherhood was less about grand gestures and more about the small, everyday moments. Like waiting outside Lucy's classroom after a late meeting, or making tea on nights when nightmares tugged at her sleep. For Lucy, the change ran deeper. Each day at the foundation, she met children whose stories mirrored her own, kids bruised by secrets, by the silence of adults who should have protected them. Each conversation became a thread, weaving her pain into something greater than sorrow, into understanding, into purpose. One autumn afternoon, as the new center neared completion, Jack gathered the team. "I want it named after someone," he began, voice low. "Someone who showed what it means to fight for love, even in silence." Lucy's breath caught. "Mom," she whispered. "The Rebecca Carter Center," Jack said, his gaze meeting hers. "For the woman who never stopped loving, even when the world tried to break her." Tears pricked Lucy's eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she smiled, feeling the weight of her mother's memory shift from ache to quiet pride. The grand opening was set for spring. Invitations went out, news spread, and old friends resurfaced. Among them was Evan, one of the triplets Jack had once discovered too late, now recovering from his heart surgery and brimming with life. His laughter rang through the halls, a living testament to what second chances could mean. Jack watched Evan playing with other children, a soft ache stirring in his chest. "I wish your mother could see this," he whispered to Lucy. "She does," Lucy said, placing a hand over her locket. "She's here." In all of this. On the morning of the opening, the sky was pale blue, the air crisp with promise. Lucy stood before the new building, heart pounding as reporters gathered. Her speech, written and rewritten a dozen times, trembled in her hand. When she began, her voice was small, but it grew with each word. "This center isn't just about walls or rooms," she told them. "It's about stories, stories like mine, like my father's, and like every child who's felt forgotten." She paused, looking at Jack, who watched her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "And it's about the people who never stop believing that love can heal what's been broken." The applause was warm, genuine, but it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the sense of release, as though with every word, Lucy had laid down another piece of the past. Later that day, as dusk painted the sky, Jack and Lucy planted a new tree beside the center, a slender oak, its branches already reaching upward. Together, they pressed soil around its roots, hands brushing, sharing a quiet moment untouched by cameras or crowds. "This one's for tomorrow," Jack whispered. "And for everyone who'll come here," Lucy added softly. They stood back, watching as the tree caught the last light of day, its leaves trembling gently in the breeze. In the months that followed, life unfolded gently, beautifully. The center's halls filled with children's laughter and quiet tears, with stories shared in whispers and shouts. Volunteers offered lessons, counseling, and sometimes just a steady hand to hold. Jack balanced foundation work with business, but his priorities had changed forever. Boardrooms no longer felt like battlegrounds, they felt like means to a greater end. Wealth, once a fortress, had become a bridge. Lucy grew too, not just taller, but braver. She led workshops, stood before city councils to advocate for change, and sometimes simply listened to a frightened child, offering words she once wished someone had said to her: "You matter. You're not alone." One evening, nearly a year after the center opened, Lucy sat in her room, flipping through an old photo album Mabel had kept. Images of her mother, of a younger Jack she'd never met. And between them, the invisible thread that had brought her to this moment. She closed the album and looked out the window, where the center's lights glowed softly against the night. "We did it," she whispered. Jack appeared in the doorway, leaning quietly against the frame. "We're still doing it," he corrected with a gentle smile. Lucy nodded. "And we'll keep doing it. For them. For us." As night deepened, father and daughter stood side by side, looking out at the future they'd chosen to build. The past was part of them, yes, but it no longer held the power to define them. What defined them now was love, not perfect, but patient and stubborn, love that had survived loss, betrayal, and fear. Love that had found its home in a family that once seemed impossible. And in that shared silence, they understood something simple, profound, and true: dawn always comes, no matter how long the night. If this story touched your heart and you want more true-to-life tales of family, redemption, and hidden fortunes, hit subscribe and join our community. Every week, we share new millionaire stories that prove hope can come from the most unexpected places. Don't miss the next chapter.